So this is part 2 of the short collections. I left off on Olive Schreiner, so I'm going to continue on. I'm going to continue about her. In 1881, Schreiner sailed to England to find a publisher for her work, and in 1883, her Story of an African Farm quickly won international recognition. The controversy around this novel gained her access to avant-garde literary and political circles. So, her story, African Farm, it was feminist, it was free-thinking, it was autobiographical, so this made it very controversial because it was a new perspective that most people haven't read before. Schreiner joined the Radical Men's and Women's Club, which aimed to overturn opinions about inequality of the sexes. So, back in her time, there was not much feminism, and she was one of the people that spoke up for that. After returning to South Africa, where political conditions were worsening, Schreiner attacked Cecil Rhodes's imperialism and appealed to England to avert the Second Boer War. And then she eventually married Samuel Cronwright. Her husband was an ostrich farmer. So hopefully some of you will remember this. So, of her life, during the Second Boer War, the British carried out a slash and burn policy, primarily on Boer homes and farms, including Schreiner, so even her home was affected by this war. After the war, Schreiner began campaigning on the issues of capital and labor. She had many health issues, asthma, heart problems, and depression, and she sought doctors in Italy and Germany, but returned to London when World War I began. Schreiner eventually died of heart failure in Cape Town, South Africa in December 11, 1920, and she's currently buried in the Great Karoo Desert. Critics consider her the first white South African novelist of note. So there's many others, but Olive Schreiner is the first great white South African novelist. Going back to some of the things that's not in this PowerPoint that you should know, during the war, she wrote very sporadically, and she always spoke out in public against the war. Here's an excerpt from her story, A Little African Story. So if you remember, it was about, and I'll get into the summary, so why don't we just get into that slide. That's about this girl, Janita. It's sort of a tragedy if you read this or if you looked at it before. Janita is a Danish child, so she's an indentured servant, and she's under the ownership of a Boer family in South Africa. She runs away, and as she runs away, she hears these 3 men planning to rob the Boers. When Janita runs back to tell the Boer family, the family that she serves, the men catch her and they kill her and they put her in an unmarked grave. The short story was first published in the New College magazine of the Eastbourne School for Boys. Schreiner refuses to allow the English reader to assume English superiority over the Africans. She condemns colonialism and insists on the evil in every race, whether it's English, Boer, African native, so she's not promoting any particular race. She's condemning almost and insists evil on all of them. And the Hottentot, for some reason, they say is particularly vicious, and the symbol in the book that you see often is these ragged yellow trousers. I don't know. Again, the Demi Dick has these weird pictures. It says, "I just don't have trousers, ragged or yellow or not." Some of the things that's not in this PowerPoint that I want you to know, in Heart of Darkness, it's very similar that it doesn't allow the reader to assume superiority, so you don't know who's the superior race. The reader is part of a dominant culture, but is not allowed to maintain his previous assumptions about the foreign culture. So, again, you come in, or any reader that reads this doesn't know which is the correct, quote-unquote, correct culture. Okay. And that's for Olive Schreiner. Next one, Ama Ata Aidu, 1942 to present. Here's the great quote for this picture. Photographer, this is a really strange pose that I have to hold. Are you sure you know what I'm doing? All right. So here's her life. She was a daughter of an American tribal chief in the she's from Ghana, region known as the Gold Coast. She grew up in the Akan tradition, which acknowledges the importance of matrilineal descent and values the communal organization of the clan. So you're going to see this in her book also, that the importance or the emphasis is on the female as the strongest person in the family, not the male. Matrilineal. Aidu attributes much of her success to the support and articulateness of the women in her family, especially her mother. Ghana gained independence from British colonial rule when Aidu was 15, but to Aidu, colonialism did not end then. So again, her father was a tribal chief, and she learned her first feminist lessons and all that stuff from African women and her mom. She attended Western Model School, so the Wesley Girls' School in Cape Coast and the University of Ghana in Legon. After graduating, she began publishing. So after its independence, Ghana was first ruled by dictator Kwame Nkrumah, then by a more democratic government, and then military. In the 70s, writers faced persecution if they criticized the military regime, so Ayu actually stopped publishing and stopped writing in 1977. She began teaching at universities and was appointed Minister of Education under Jerry Rawlings. However, uncomfortable with the increasing conservatism of the government, she left for Zimbabwe. So she has a more dramatic history than some of the other ones that we read about. There's a whole bunch of, if you read through the chapter, there's a whole bunch of works that she's responsible for. She's even, you could write this down, but she's even published poetry, drama, fiction, and her second novel, A Love Story, or Changes, A Love Story, actually won a prize for African literature in 1993, so she's not that old or that far away from us. Here's some of her selected work. If you remember, Certain Winds from the South, if you read it us within class, it's about a guy and trying to tell his wife that he's leaving for the South because that's where all the jobs are. And he wasn't allowed to see his wife and say goodbye because the mom, the strong person of the family, wouldn't let him do it. So here's the context. This short story actually appeared in No Sweetness Here, 1970, so about 40 years ago. And this collection specifically focuses on Ghana's dystopian present and the lessons it may contain about Africa's future. The idea that Ghana is dystopian is underlined by the title of the collection, No Sweetness Here. It also examines the role of the African women in society and the nature of neocolonial society, emphasizing the power of the feminine voice. So this whole collection in which it was published is all about the female and feminism. So here's a summary in case you forgot. In rural, impoverished northern Ghana, the kola nut harvest has been poor. So if you remember reading the story in class, remember we talked about how the kola nut harvest used to be huge and booming and great and awesome. Now it sucks. Mama Asana's daughter, Hawa, has just had a son. So Mama, one of the main characters, has a daughter, and now she has a new grandson. Hawa's husband, Issa, leaves for the urban south to find work to feed his family. In a dramatic monologue, Mama Asana tells Hawa about Mama Asana's husband, who also went south, but as a soldier in World War II and never returned. So he talked, the grandma in the story tells Hawa that her husband never returned, so she obviously is not very happy about this. She draws parallels about the Ghana of the 40s and the Ghanas of now, and Mama Asana's and Hawa's situations. Here's a quick illustration of kola nuts, the miracle drug, I don't know. So here's the, it's not on here, but the parallels here in this last bullet point that I want to emphasize. In the 40s, because of World War II, there was a poor economy. Mama's husband dies, and then Hawa is a newborn. Now, in the telling of the story, it sort of mirrors that, where the nut harvest results in a poor economy. Issa has to find work and leaves, and then we also have another newborn. So this story has some sort of symbolism. The analysis, the main dichotomy of the story is between North and South Ghana. So here's a picture of North and South Ghana. The North is closer to the desert, closer to the Sahara. So everything around here is now more rural, and what was once cool and the harvest was plentiful is now leaving, and everyone's going down south for the jobs. The North is rural and impoverished, made of primarily savanna and grassland, and the South is wealthy, urban, it's by the sea. The wind refers to harmattan, which blows dust and sand south from the Sahara Desert. During the second half of the story, Mama Asana is the only speaker, making it a dramatic monologue. Hawa may never have woken up. It's a just call and response, but Mama Asana speaks Hawa's questions for her. So, one thing that you might want to write down that is not on this PowerPoint, so how do you know that it's difficult, or how do you establish the setting? Well, one, they talked about how poor and the conditions are where they live. Two, they reference Islam, the dominant religion of North Ghana. They talk about the rich Southerners, and then obviously the title, Certain Winds from the South. So it tells you that the setting is the North. Lastly, the story establishes Mama as the family matriarch. Remember, the female in her books is the more dominant character. She prevents Issa from saving his wife and his newborn before he leaves. She must be consulted about his decision to go south, and then the narrator forces the reader to feel Mama's female bodily sensations by conveying her thoughts. And the last one we're going to talk about in this video is Derek Walcott. I don't know why they have this picture with not Derek Walcott, and please stop talking. So the life of Derek Walcott. He was born in 1930, so relatively young, and in St. Lucia. I showed you the picture, it's in the West Indies. Again, he doesn't get more mixed than this. He has 2 white grandfathers who were plantation owners and 2 black grandmothers who were slaves. His family is mixed with English-speaking Methodists and French-speaking on a French-speaking Catholic island. His father died in 1931, so if you do the math, he was only 1 year old when his father died. And his mother and his father are artistic friends. They sort of introduced him to the arts as a career. At St. Mary's, Walcott was brainwashed, so that's why the brain and the washing machine, with European cultural standards and began writing. And he then graduated from the University College of the West Indies in 1953. In the 1950s, he continued to write plays, married his first wife, and worked as a journalist. In 1959, he settled in Trinidad and founded the Theatre Workshop. In the 1960s, he continued to write for papers creatively. He married his second wife, so 10 years later, he married his second wife. And his collection, Green Knight Poems, was actually the most highly regarded volume of poetry in that era. And here's a cool picture of him. He's the one in this blue. And the caption is, "Even famous poets can have awkward pictures." So again, just a brief summary about his life, and you can read more in the packets if you're confused. The life of Derek Walcott continuing on. In the 70s, he published more autobiography, more plays. He became more critical, getting more critical acclaim. In the 80s, he started teaching at universities here in the US. He married his third wife. So here's the picture. It says, "You're not the only one. You're the only one, the third only one." Ha ha ha. He got the Nobel Prize in 1992, and he continues to publish poetry and essays, and his most recent poetry was actually published last March. So he's very, very current and relevant. Here's an excerpt from his work, A Far Cry from Africa. I'm not going to read it, but we can go over the context and what's the summary of it. So this was in his first major volume in A Green Knight, and he engages the Caribbean in multiple aspects. He uses the 17th century poem The Garden by Marvell as a metaphysical backdrop for the St. Lucian natural world. The volume is Walcott's coming of age as the bard of his place. It also represents Walcott's in-between space between Africa and English. We're talking about this hybridity, this in-between. And this poem is actually his best known and most widely anthologized poem. So here's a brief summary or another context. Remember we talked about this is set during the Mau Mau Rebellion. The Mau Mau was a Kikuyu-dominated militant group that fought the British to gain Kenya's independence. During the Western Rebellion, the British imposed a police state on Kenyans. The British tortured, killed thousands of Kenyans. Although only a few European settlers died, Europeans panicked. So this picture, we saw this in your packets, but this is a picture of some of the prisoners held in camps in the Mau Mau Rebellion. This poem shows the failing colonial project in Africa. So we talked about how they're trying to colonize this place, and it sucked, and it wasn't working, and people were dying. Ironically, the English use brutality and oppression to talk about peace and civilization. The speaker is actually torn, who's better, Africa or the English culture? Walcott was ahead of his time, not taking the conventional view of African savagery and violence. He sympathizes with both white and native victims. The increasing length of the 3 stanzas and the disintegrating rhyme scheme reflect increasing passion. So we talked about this in class, but it stops rhyming, it's not very consistent, so it sounds like, or it's representative of how this isn't working, same with the rhyme isn't working. The speaker suggests even a righteous cause is a waste, referring to the Spanish Civil War, and he compares the English to Nietzsche's concept of a Superman, which was adopted by the Nazis. So those are all the short selections. I want you guys to read through it if you don't remember. Read through the summaries, skim through it, look at your highlights, but through these 2 PowerPoints, hopefully you guys got a better understanding, or at least remember what the short stories were about. So study hard, and I'll see y'all on Thursday.